It is surreal, is it not? Celebrating Easter this way. I mean, this is not the Easter we are accustomed to. The traditions that we hold, kids scrambling around hunting for eggs, bunnies, dressing in our Sunday best, coming to church together, singing Christ the Lord is risen today with loud trumpet fare and throngs of people in great joy. It's one of the most uplifting services in the liturgical year, and Christians around the world celebrating in different ways. It's awesome. Going and gathering with family and baskets and dresses and Sunday best for Easter. We are built for being together on Easter. So this Easter feels very peculiar, very different. As McCormick Place, a place of great commerce and expos and gatherings, is turned into a field hospital. And National Guard are called out to help with supply chains and to keep the peace in the streets. Where it's not just the tomb that is empty, but also the parks, the schools, the churches, even the streets. Isn't it just a little unnerving when you go out? You go to the grocery, you mask up, you glove up, you look at the person, people taking their kids away for fear of infection, for fear of taking this home, giving it to somebody else, to a mother, to a father, to a child. And fear has kind of gripped us. But I would argue, my brothers and sisters, that perhaps more than any other time, in isolation, in anxiety, in daily tolls of infection, and at the edge of human suffering and grief and death and dying, we are closer to the authentic Easter, the first Easter, than you and I, most of us, have ever experienced in our lives. Because Easter begins in darkness. Easter begins in Mary Magdalene rising in the morning thinking, this can't be happening. It was just a few days ago that we were parading together, and the throng of people shouting with joy, Hosanna! Blessed is the Son of David, who is going to lift us, who is going to fulfill the hopes and dreams of Israel, and let us realize everything we've longed for in the kingdom of God. This is the one who, when he spoke to me individually, helped me feel connected to God in a way I've never felt, loved in a way I've never felt. How can this be happening? It's a nightmare that I'm waking up from. This can't be real when I wake up in the morning, and I bet that many of us have woken up this past month and thought to ourselves, I'm going to check the ball game scores for baseball. I'm going to go to so-and-so's birthday because we had it on the calendar. I'm going to get ready to go to Easter, family. And we're not. This can't be real. This one who was the hope of Israel, the hope of her life, was snuffed out and gone. Parades that started off in triumph on Palm Sunday ended in him being paraded like an animal to slaughter through the streets, back raw from lashes, crown on his head, cutting into his forehead, him hunched over, carrying this beam as people taunted and jeered and hung him up on this cross and mocked him. And Mary Magdalene screaming inside, stop! Please, can't you see you're hurting him? Why are we doing this? And in her grief, the realization of her paralysis, because she didn't say any of those things, most likely. She's too afraid, too shocked, too shell-shocked. How is this happening? And too guilt-ridden. I'm sorry. My Messiah, my Lord. She gets up in guilt, in pain, in fear, in anger. So many of the emotions we're feeling. And she's alone. She goes to the tomb to say goodbye, to find some kind of closure. One of the hardest things during this outbreak is how many people, I just had a call this morning, a church family member whose family member had died, and in tears, I couldn't be there when they were dying. I couldn't say goodbye the way I wanted to, which is exactly some of the pain Mary Magdalene was experiencing. This isn't how this was supposed to end, this story of my life with Jesus. And so she goes to the tomb in the dark, hoping again that this is a bad dream, like some bad rerun of Groundhog Day and Sonny and Cher playing in the morning. Every day, the same thing. No, something different. She comes to the tomb, and as she's going to go there, the stone is rolled away, and a different kind of fear grips her. A fear that the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. What is going on? That tomb should be sealed. Who's there? She's a woman alone in the graveyard. And she has gone from feeling sorrow and despair to feeling scared. She sees there's nothing in the tomb but grave clothes. She runs, hysterical, I imagine, to the disciples. She rouses them in the morning. Wake up, wake up. They've taken his body. He's not in the tomb. He's not there. Could you imagine these guys in their own grief? Sleeping, half sleeping, getting startled awake, hearing the words, his body is not where it's supposed to be. Could you imagine? Several days after a mother, father, grandfather, grandmother, somebody you love, planning to go to lay some flowers at the grave, and a family member coming and say, somebody has dug him up. He's not there. What? What do you mean he's not there? And so these guys start running. It's a text, these verses, that I often kind of lightly call the heavenly foot race. I imagine, John, the beloved disciple, and Peter, and a little bit of Chariots of Fire in the background. And John's like, I got there first. I mean, twice we see the disciple who got there first. He gets there first, and I've always wondered, it's just a little bit of bragging rights, it's, come on, I'll reach you the car, come on. Or is it something else going on? Now, lightheartedly, you might say, well, it's just kind of this one-upsmanship. He's the younger disciple. He's faster than Peter. Peter goes in first, deference to elders. He's the first often mentioned as disciples. But maybe there's something else in there. Maybe John, who this gospel is attributed, wanted to say, I know how special Peter's relationship is to Jesus, but I loved him deeply too. And so everything I had, I poured out to see if what she said was right. And I ran my heart out. I ran faster than I've ever ran in my life. Peter goes in first. He sees it as Mary described it. He's not here. Where have they taken him? Who has taken him? The disciples look around and it says they believed. Now, I'm not Sherlock Holmes, but I'd like to ask all of you and myself listening, what did they believe? Did they believe that Christ was risen from death? That he had conquered the grave? That their sorrow had turned to joy? Because it says, as Virginia so beautifully read, it says that they didn't yet understand the scriptures and how they would be fulfilled. They'd be raised to death. So if they believe that Christ was resurrected as we believe today, then the most profound understatement of all the Bible happens next. It reads, they looked around, they believed, because they hadn't yet understood the scriptures, that he would rise again. And then, drum roll, they went home. Hey, John, maybe if we get back, we can catch breakfast before things go cold. What? What do you mean you go home? Christ is risen, the tomb is empty, they go home? Maybe it's they realize they believe what Mary told them. He's not here. But then even still, the guys don't come off very colorful here, very understanding, very in touch with their emotions, because they leave Mary hysterical, sobbing there. Hey, Mary, you got this. All right, we're out of here. Thanks for nothing, guys. Are you kidding me? They just go home? Go back to bed? They don't help her look? They don't sit there to comfort her? No, they just, all right. John, you're writing in. Okay. So back to Mary and her lack of help from the other disciples. She's weeping there. She looks into the tomb and she sees these angels, these angelic figures in white. They say, why are you crying? She said, please, I'm looking for my Lord. They've moved his body. Can you help me? And she hears a rustling behind her. She turns and she suspects it's the groundskeeper. Sir, please. She's beside herself with grief. Please, I need to see him. Where have you put him? Can you show me the plot? Can you show me the cave? I need to say I'm sorry. I need to say goodbye. I need to say how much you have meant to me. Because right now it feels like all hope is gone. My world has been crushed. It feels like, not that God has blessed me, but God has taken away the very hope that we had, and he's gone. And my brothers and sisters, here is where Easter matters. In despair, in the loss of hope, in feeling overwhelmed and powerless in the face of what we face, whether virus pandemics, and we feel like there's nothing we know to stop this, in the face of the death of the one called the Messiah, the Son of the living God, and in the brutality and ugliness and full rejection of humanity, Jesus speaks her name, Mary, and speaks your name, Ed, Steve, Stacy. I am here. Nothing that happened on that ugly Friday, nothing you could possibly do will stop me. No grave deep enough or wide enough will hold me from loving you. Mary, I know you by name. I always have. And in Easter joy, know that not even death will keep me from you. Barbara Brown Taylor, in her book Bread of Angels, says, of death, of course we're afraid. Who isn't? The good news isn't that when the bottom has fallen out from under you, when you've crashed through every safety net you have, the good news is that you cannot fall further than God can catch you. Mary goes running from the tomb, from meeting Jesus, running, the first one, the first messenger of Easter who has been alone. And she witnesses and takes it to the disciples and says, guys, I know I started off saying, I don't know where they took him, I don't know who took him, I don't know why, but I am here to tell you, I saw Jesus. Not his body, not dead in burial clothes. He looked at me, he talked to me, he said my name, he is alive, he is risen, he is not dead, I don't know how, but by the power of God, he is risen. And everything changes. We are an Easter people. Not just one Sunday a year, but every day. Easter is at the heart of what Christians are. To say, in the midst of despair, in the midst of suffering, God doesn't abandon us. God shows up in it. And God steps through it with us. In the valley of the shadow of death and darkness, God steps in and leads us through and says, I've got you when you can't see the light. I'll never abandon you. Even if you try to kill me, I'll keep coming for you. I mean, it's so powerful. That's why I always say you've got to worship on Good Friday to appreciate Easter. Because all the things we as humanity do to Jesus, the torture, the brutality, the rejection, and when we would say, if we did that to each other, to hell with you, quite literally, Jesus says, no. Let me show you a different way. A way that begins and starts with divine love and steps through every suffering, every brutality, every form of human ugliness, sin, violence, and brokenness in this world and says, you're still my children, and I'd never turn my back on you. It's the heart of Easter joy. And I wonder, as the disciples heard these words from Mary, that he is risen, how then they reacted. Each of the gospel writers tell beautiful different stories about how people experienced and witnessed Christ of the resurrection as she proclaims he is risen. The late Henry Nouwen wrote, we are afraid of a lot of things. Mostly we are afraid of dying and death. This fear takes away our God-given freedom. But when we can reach beyond our fears to the one who loves us with a love that was there before we were even born and will be there after we die, no matter what we face, then nothing will be able to take away that freedom. Or Hans Küng, another Christian writer, who says it very powerfully. The Easter message is that Jesus didn't die into nothingness, but into God. So that our last road doesn't lead to nothingness, to emptiness, but to the most primal ground, from mortal darkness to God's eternal and abundant life. Easter, my friends, is not just a date on a calendar. Like the reporter said, it's a shame that Easter isn't going to happen. No, that's ridiculous. Forgive me. I know what he means. Easter won't happen in terms of egg hunts and family gatherings and church gatherings like we're used to. But make no mistake, Easter is here. It has always been here. A God that proclaims from before our birth, through every span of our life, through every joy and tragedy, every failure and disappointment, and every success, you are my beloved. You are my children. And I would go through hell and back, death itself, to remind you that I've got you. So now the question remains, 2,000 years later, even in the midst of pandemic isolation and anxiety and fear, how do we witness to Easter joy? In the face of hopelessness, how do we speak hope? In the face of fear, how do we speak joy? And in the face of death and dying and suffering, reminding one another and the world around us that in the heart of that pain is Easter promise of a God who says, don't let yourselves be shaken because you don't face this alone. I have you, my children, both in this moment and in anything to come. Don't be afraid. Mary, I know you by name. Easter promise. And God doesn't ever let his promises fall through empty. So my brothers and sisters, I pray that no matter how fearful or overwhelmed you feel, because I've had my moments, I'm sure you've had yours, or how depressed the news may make you, or how anxious you are about returning to normal or getting back to whatever it is that we were. May Easter remind us that God says, before all this, and long after it, I am with you. The tomb is empty. As you come this Easter Sunday in grief and pain and suffering, the question is, how do you receive that tomb? Are there still men and women and children who witness to that Easter promise of joy? In the African American church, they say, "Can I get a witness?" Because otherwise, Easter's just a date in history. And it was never meant to be that. It was always God's love message through a risen Christ. So how about you? He is risen. What say you? He is risen indeed. May Easter joy and peace be with you, my brothers and sisters. Amen.